At 15, most boys are still protected by innocence, still allowed to believe the world will eventually reward them for their potential, still allowed to think life unfolds slowly. But poverty accelerates everything. It ages people early, teaches survival before identity, and replaces childhood with responsibility. In Peter's neighborhood, dreams were spoken about casually, but survival was taken seriously. The boys around him still chased football contracts, music deals, and fantasies of escape. But Peter had already begun understanding something far heavier. Nobody was coming to save him. Football used to make him feel alive. Not because of fame, not because of money, but because it gave him permission to forget who he was for a little while. For 90 minutes, he could forget the leaking roof, forget the empty cupboards, forget the pressure waiting for him at home. On the field, he wasn't poor. He wasn't trapped. He wasn't somebody's responsibility. He was free. And he was good. Very good. The kind of talent that made grown men stop conversations to watch. The kind of talent people spoke about with certainty. Teachers noticed him. Coaches protected him. Neighbors bragged about him like he already belonged to something greater than the streets around him. For a while, Peter believed it too. That boy is going somewhere. But talent means very little when life keeps demanding sacrifice. And eventually, survival always asks for payment. Every family in the neighborhood seemed to have one. An unfinished monument to hope. Concrete walls rising slowly over decades. A physical reminder that everybody believed life would improve. Someday, eventually. A grey concrete skeleton sitting in the middle of the yard. Half-finished walls. Rusting steel rods reaching into the sky. A future permanently under construction. Every dollar Peter earned disappeared into that building. Not into savings, not into school, not into opportunity. Into cement, into blocks, into somebody else's dream. His parents didn't look at him like a son anymore. They looked at him like stability, like income, like labor. And the worst part wasn't the pressure, it was the guilt. Because Peter loved them, even while resenting them. Every time he imagined leaving, he could already hear disappointment waiting for him. So he stayed. And slowly, the walls around that unfinished house began forming around him too. Eventually, Peter stopped carrying football boots. He started carrying knives instead. The restaurant kitchen became his new field. Hotter, louder, more unforgiving. The air smelled like grease, smoke, and exhaustion. Every shift felt endless. But inside the chaos, Peter discovered something dangerous. He was exceptional. Not average, not decent, exceptional. His hands moved with instinct. His timing was perfect. His attention to detail, obsessive. Food became the one thing in his life he could completely control. A plate either worked or it didn't. No pretending, no excuses. The kitchen respected precision, and Peter needed somewhere that respected effort. Because outside those walls, effort often meant nothing. Hard-working people still struggled. Good people still suffered, and dreams still collapsed. But inside the kitchen, discipline created results, and that truth became addictive. Still, talent without belief becomes invisible. So while everyone praised his work, Peter kept shrinking himself, because deep down, he still saw himself as a poor boy from a forgotten neighborhood. And poor boys aren't taught to think big, they're taught to be grateful. Even around friends, Peter felt alone. Loneliness does not always come from isolation. Sometimes it comes from realizing your mind no longer fits inside the conversations around you. They talked loudly about becoming rich, about escaping, about one lucky break changing everything. But Peter had started noticing something uncomfortable. Nobody was actually building anything. Everybody wanted success, nobody wanted discipline. The conversations never changed, the dreams never evolved. Weeks passed, months passed, years passed, and everybody stayed exactly where they started. Peter could feel himself sinking beside them. Not because they were bad people, but because mediocrity spreads quietly. It normalizes stagnation, makes comfort feel intelligent, makes fear feel practical. Every night he went home more exhausted, not physically, but spiritually. He was terrified that this would become his entire life. Work, bills, pressure, sleep, repeat. No growth, no freedom, no meaning. Just survival stretched across decades. Then, one night, everything shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly enough that Peter almost missed it. She arrived quietly. No grand entrance, no dramatic moment. Just a woman from England sitting alone in the corner of a small Jamaican restaurant. Her name was Cleopatra. She carried herself differently. Not arrogant, more certain. Like somebody who had seen a larger world. Peter noticed the way she observed everything carefully, the way she seemed unimpressed by noise, the way her presence softened the room without trying. And when he placed her food on the table, their eyes met. For the first time in years, Peter felt something awaken inside of him. Hope can return unexpectedly, sometimes through ambition, sometimes through pain, and sometimes through another human being seeing value in you before you can see it in yourself. Not pressure, not obligation, not fear. Possibility. It startled him, because somewhere along the way he had forgotten that life could still surprise him. When Cleopatra returned to England, the silence hit Peter immediately. It was strange how quickly somebody could become emotionally necessary. How one person's absence could expose how empty life felt before they arrived. The restaurant felt colder, the neighborhood felt smaller, the future felt heavy again. But every night their phones lit up. Messages turned into hours, hours turned into attachment. Across oceans and time zones, Cleopatra became Peter's mirror. She reflected back a version of himself he had never seen clearly. Capable, intelligent, gifted, worth so much more. And slowly, Peter began noticing how much of his identity had been inherited. Inherited from poverty, inherited from fear, inherited from people who stopped dreaming long ago. For the first time, he questioned the script he had been given so long ago. Peter became obsessed with growth. Not superficial motivation, not fantasy, real growth. The painful kind. The kind that forces a person to confront every excuse they have ever hidden behind. Every morning before work, he walked through the same streets, listening to the voices that challenged him. Voices that spoke about discipline, ownership, responsibility, vision. At first, the words sounded ridiculous. Become the architect of your life. Think bigger. Demand more from yourself. Nobody around Peter spoke like that. But the more he listened, the more something inside him shifted. He started walking differently, standing differently, thinking differently. The backpack on his shoulders no longer felt like weight. It felt like preparation. Peter stopped seeing himself as trapped. He started seeing himself as unfinished. And unfinished things can still evolve. One morning, Peter noticed an advertisement buried inside the newspaper. Most people would have turned the page without thinking. But Peter stared at it as if the universe itself had placed a question directly in front of him. A luxury hotel searching for a head chef. For a long moment, he simply stared at it. Old Peter would have laughed, would have immediately disqualified himself, would have said things like, "That's not for people like me." But something had changed. Now the fear sounded familiar, predictable, small. And Peter finally understood something powerful. Confidence isn't something people are born with. It's built. Built through repetition, through suffering, through refusing to remain the same person forever. So instead of looking away, he applied. Hands shaking, heart racing, but he applied. Because courage is rarely loud. Sometimes courage is just refusing to disappear quietly. The old Peter would have ignored the opportunity completely. He would have convinced himself that rooms like this belong to people with better schools, better connections, better beginnings. But Cleopatra's belief in him had slowly become louder than his fear. And for the first time in his life, Peter walked into a room without apologizing for where he came from. Pressure used to intimidate Peter. Now it revealed him. Because after years of surviving hardship, chaos no longer frightened him. Cooking became the one place where his mind felt free. Every ingredient carried memory. Every movement carried identity. This wasn't just food. It was Jamaica translated through struggle, discipline, and ambition. For most of his life, Peter believed his background made him small. But standing in that kitchen, he finally understood something powerful. Pedigree may open doors, but talent, discipline, and belief can make people forget where you started entirely. Peter still lived in the same neighborhood, the same dogs barking, the same potholes, the same unfinished buildings, the same people trapped inside routines they secretly hated. Externally, almost nothing had changed. The same roads, the same unfinished house, the same responsibilities. But internally, he was no longer the same man. And transformation always begins internally first. Long before the money, long before the success, long before the world notices. Because the most important moment in a person's life isn't when they finally escape. It's the moment they realize they were never meant to stay trapped. And somewhere between the kitchen heat, the lonely nights, the motivational voices in his headphones, and the woman who saw potential in him before he could see it in himself, Peter finally began to believe that his life could become larger than survival. Not overnight, not magically, but deliberately. One decision, one shift in identity, one courageous step at a time. Somewhere in the distance, the neighborhood slowly wakes up. Dogs bark. Music begins playing from old radios. The island moves exactly as it always has. But Peter stands still for one final moment. Not because he has already escaped, but because he finally believes escape is possible. And sometimes belief is the first real victory a person ever wins.